Hello, welcome to this video in our Python object-oriented programming course by coding-bootcamps.com. Again, if you haven't taken the Intro to Python course, that's at this link up at the top. You can copy it and put it in your web browser, and it'll bring you to our intro course that goes over things like lists, arrays, just basic data types like integers, floats, things like that, how to write loops. But this is a more advanced course, so you shouldn't be doing this until you take our intro course. But anyway, I just wanted to get into some more things that were in the course docs about classes. So there's this term in programming called mutability, and we say that a class or an object is mutable if you're allowed to make changes to it. So classes by default are mutable because after you create a class object, you can go back and later change that object. So if I wanted to change the name of Michael to George, I could do employee1 dot name equals George, and then print employee1 again, or print the information of employee1 again. So now you can see employee 2200 was Michael, his name was Michael, and now his name is George, but he still has like the same position, and he still has the same ID number. So you can use, when I do employee1.name, that's going to go back to the class format, and it's going to say, okay, change the value of the name variable to George from Michael. And you do employee1.name because you're referring to the employees stored in employee1, and then you're referring to the name, which is the attribute of the class. So this shows how classes are mutable because you can go back later and change different attributes of your class objects. It's very easy to do. I also wanted to talk about what happens if you don't give the variables. Well, basically what happens is you get an error if you don't give all the parameters that you need to. So let's say you did, you created employee 3, and you did employee, and what's another word? Let's do female, Dana. And her age is 31. And I try to run the code. So I'm going to get an error on line 35, and it's going to show missing 2 required positional arguments, position and ID. So I didn't give all 4 parameters I needed to when I created the employee object, so that's going to throw an error because creating this employee object, just like with a function, it requires me to follow this format. Now you might be saying, why are they saying missing 2 positional arguments instead of 3? Because there's 5 parameters up here and there's only 2 down here. And 5 minus 2 is 3. The reason is the self keyword just refers to the instance of the class. So every time you create a new employee object, the instance of that is already being passed to the self parameter. So self is kind of like, it refers to an instance of the object, but it's kind of like almost not invisible, but it doesn't, you don't need to, as long as you include the self keyword, you don't, when you're creating the class, you don't really need to think about it when you're passing parameters. So when you're passing parameters, you never pass it a self parameter. That happens automatically. And then every time you define new member functions in your class, you would always include the self keyword. So if you created another function, new function, it's all if you use a good interpreter IDE, it's automatically going to put self there because that's all that's required, and then also self is automatically passed to the function. But and then just a couple other things. The pass keyword in the course docs, we talk about the pass keyword just being a way to act as a placeholder for code you don't need, or not code you don't need, a placeholder for a place where you don't want to write code yet, or you don't need to write code. So if you created a function like Actually, I should just bring back that function I had before. So let's just say new function. And I didn't want to write any code for this function. I could just use the pass keyword, and now I'm not going to get an error for having a function with no function definition. So when I run my code, it's just going to pass over this function, see the pass keyword, and then it's not going to give me problems when I run my code down here because it sees the pass keyword. We also talk in the docs about what instantiation means. Instantiation is just a term for creating an object. You hear it a lot with classes when you create class objects, and also assigning initializing variables to it. So when I had employee 1 up here and I gave him the name Michael and the position assistant captain, these other attributes, I'm instantiating an employee object and I'm giving it these attributes. So instantiating really just means creating and assigning initializing variables to it, or initializing parameters to it. So again, this is going to throw an error because there's not enough parameters. So if I want to get rid of the error, give a position, just say what the other positions we had. Let's just say medical officer, and then had the ID number 2345. Now if we run, we don't get any errors. I didn't do anything, like I didn't print her information, but now she exists as an object. And then just one other thing to show that two objects are located. I wanted to talk about memory addresses. So when you create new employee objects, if we tested is employee 1 or print employee 1 equals employee 2, whoops, and I run, I'm going to get this word false down here. And what that's saying is that these aren't the same objects because it's checking their memory addresses and it's saying they're at different memory addresses. So it's not saying is Michael and Raphael different people. It's saying are these two employee objects different objects. So anytime you create an object, and that's not just with classes, just any object in Python, that object has to be stored in the computer somewhere at a memory address. So even if you created x equals 3 and you created x equals y equals 7. Well, I don't need to create new variables to show that, but even if you do it with random integers or floats or lists or strings, there's a specific memory address that you're placing objects at when you're creating them. So all the information that's associated with that object, it's stored at that memory address. And that memory address is usually assigned a series of letters and characters that are in hex code. So you might see like a hex number like this, 0. If you looked up the memory address of, this is in the course docs, if you looked at the memory address of a instantiated objects, you would see something like this. This is hex, and what hex is it's instead of like how we use normal numbers, which is 0 through 9 for 10 different numbers, it's 0 through the letter F for 16 characters. So we start using letters because we don't have any other numbers, and there's reasons why we use that, but basically just know that that's the memory address, and if you see it, and that when you create new objects, they have different memory addresses because you're not just creating objects, those objects have to be stored somewhere in the computer, and so they have a memory address associated with it somewhere in the computer memory. So yeah, that's just a few more things about the course docs, and then in the next video I will get a little bit more into methods, and we'll do some review on the topics we've showed so far. Okay, so thanks for watching, and see you in the next video. Bye.